Welcome. Today, we're diving into why theory matters in forensic and criminal psychology. Theories aren't just academic. They help us predict who might offend, explain why crime happens, design better interventions, and evaluate what works. No single theory explains all crime. Instead, different theories focus on different levels, from society-wide issues to individual biology. These approaches aren't always in competition. They can complement each other, giving us a fuller picture of why offending occurs and persists. Let's explore how these levels of analysis help us understand criminal behavior. Key concept in forensic psychology is the level of analysis. This refers to the scale at which a theory locates the causes of behavior. Levels can range from the macro, like societal structures, to the micro, such as neural systems and genetics. Understanding these levels helps us see why crime isn't randomly distributed, but instead clusters in certain areas, social groups, or networks. By considering multiple levels, we can better grasp the complex factors that drive offending. Start at the societal level. Societal or macro theories see crime as a consequence of social structure. For example, social strain theory suggests that when society puts pressure on people to achieve success, but blocks legitimate means for some, strain results. Some may turn to crime as an alternative. This explains why crime rates are higher in areas with structural disadvantage, but it doesn't fully explain why not everyone facing strain offends. Still, it's a powerful lens for seeing patterned inequalities in crime. Social strain theory proposes that societal pressures, like a strong emphasis on financial success, combined with blocked opportunities, produce strain. Some individuals respond by using illegitimate means, including crime. For example, if education and stable jobs are out of reach for certain groups, some may turn to theft or the drug trade to achieve status or resources. This theory highlights how structural inequalities can drive crime, but also reminds us that not everyone under strain offends. Moving to the community level, theories here focus on how crime clusters in specific areas. Differential opportunity theory, for example, suggests that when legitimate opportunities are blocked in disadvantaged neighborhoods, people may turn to illegitimate ones. Neighborhoods with fewer resources and weaker institutions can facilitate illegal alternatives, like informal economies or gangs. This explains why crime hotspots exist, but still needs individual-level explanations for why some residents offend and others don't. Differential opportunity theory says that when legitimate paths to advancement are blocked, people may turn to illegitimate ones. In neighborhoods with limited jobs, poor schools, and high gang presence, there are fewer legitimate pathways and more visible criminal ones. This theory fits the observation that crime is not evenly spread, but rather concentrated where opportunities are lacking. Still, it doesn't fully explain why only some individuals in these areas offend. Group influence and socialization theories focus on how criminal behavior is learned through social relationships. Differential association theory, for instance, suggests that people learn criminal behavior by interacting with others, especially peers. They pick up not just techniques, but also the attitudes and rationalizations that justify crime. This helps explain why crime clusters in networks and why peer effects are so strong, though it may underplay individual differences like impulsivity or empathy. According to differential association theory, criminal behavior is learned through interaction with others. For example, a teenager who spends time with peers who normalize shoplifting may learn both the behavior and the belief that it's acceptable or low risk. This theory explains why crime can be contagious within social networks, but it may not fully account for why some people are more susceptible to peer influence than others. Individual approaches look at biological and psychological traits that increase the risk of offending. For example, antisocial personality traits, like impulsivity, low empathy, and aggression, are linked to higher offending risk. Someone high in impulsivity and low in empathy may react aggressively to provocation, increasing the risk of violent crime. These approaches explain stable individual differences, but can risk ignoring broader social and structural drivers of crime. Antisocial personality traits involve a stable pattern of disregarding social norms and others' rights. This often includes impulsivity, low empathy, aggression, and rule-breaking. For example, someone with these traits may be more likely to react aggressively to provocation, leading to violent offending. While this approach helps explain persistent patterns, it's important not to overlook the role of environment and social context in shaping behavior. Moffat's developmental taxonomy identifies two main pathways for offenders: adolescence-limited AL and life course persistent LCP. AL offenders show antisocial behavior mainly during adolescence, often influenced by peers and the maturity gap. LCP offenders, on the other hand, begin offending in early childhood and persist into adulthood, often due to genetic risk, neuropsychological deficits, and adverse environments. This model integrates development and recognizes that not all offenders follow the same path. Adolescence-limited offenders are those whose antisocial behavior emerges mainly in adolescence and declines in adulthood. The key mechanism here is the maturity gap the mismatch between biological maturity and social or legal restrictions. Delinquency becomes a way to signal status and autonomy among peers. For example, minor theft or vandalism during teenage years may decrease as adult roles become available and the need to prove oneself fades. Of course, persistent offenders start showing antisocial behavior in early childhood, and this pattern continues into adulthood. Mechanisms include higher genetic risk, neuropsychological deficits, adverse environments, and cumulative continuity, where early antisocial behavior leads to further disadvantages, like school exclusion and association with deviant peers. For example, a child with poor impulse control and harsh parenting may continue offending throughout life. Biological and genetic perspectives have gained renewed attention in recent years. Advances in neuroscience and behavioral genetics allow us to examine whether certain neuropsychological differences contribute to impulsivity, poor decision-making, reduced empathy, or heightened aggression. These perspectives help identify risk mechanisms that are hard to observe behaviorally and can inform tailored interventions, but they are not standalone explanations for crime. Neuropsychological deficit is a measurable impairment in cognitive functions, such as inhibition, planning, or working memory, linked to brain systems. For example, reduced function in the prefrontal cortex, PFC, is often associated with impulsivity, poor planning, and difficulty inhibiting aggressive responses. These deficits can increase the risk of offending, especially when combined with other risk factors. The prefrontal cortex supports executive functions like planning, impulse control, decision-making, and emotion regulation. Reduced PFC function is linked to impulsivity, poor future planning, and difficulty inhibiting aggressive responses. This means that individuals with PFC abnormalities may be more prone to offending, especially violent or impulsive crimes. The amygdala is involved in processing emotional salience, fear learning, and sensitivity to others, distress cues. Reduced amygdala responsiveness has been linked to lower fear conditioning, reduced responsiveness to distress, and increased risk-taking. These traits are often seen in individuals with callous unemotional characteristics, which can increase the risk of offending. Trait aggression refers to a stable tendency to respond with anger or aggression across time and contexts. Neuroimaging studies link aggression with functional differences in circuits involving the prefrontal cortex and limbic regions. The key idea is that aggression risk may involve an imbalance between bottom-up reactivity, like threat or frustration, and top-down control, inhibition and regulation. Traumatic brain injury, TBI, is a disruption to brain function caused by external force. TBI is much more common among young offenders than in the general population, sometimes 3 to 8 times higher. TBI can impact frontal brain regions responsible for impulse control, planning, social behavior, and emotional regulation. However, it's important to note that causality is complex. TBI may increase offending risk, but risky lifestyles can also increase TBI risk. Genetic factors are studied through family, twin, and adoption studies. If identical twins show higher concordance for offending than fraternal twins, genetic influence is suggested. Adoption studies look at whether adopted children resemble their biological or adoptive parents in offending risk. While genetics play a role, no single gene explains crime, and gene-environment interactions are crucial. Gene-environment interaction means that genetic effects depend on environmental exposure. For example, low MAOA activity combined with severe childhood maltreatment has been linked to increased risk of antisocial outcomes. However, low MAOA without maltreatment does not show the same risk. This highlights the importance of context in understanding genetic influences on crime. Biological and genetic approaches offer valuable insights into risk mechanisms and can inform tailored interventions. They can help with early identification and prevention if used ethically. However, no biological marker is specific enough to explain crime by itself. There's also a risk of biological determinism and stigma, and many findings are correlational. Social and environmental factors remain strong predictors of crime patterns. Adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, are stressful or traumatic events during childhood, such as abuse, neglect, or household dysfunction. The more ACEs a person experiences, the higher their risk of negative outcomes, including offending. ACEs are linked to increased likelihood of serious, chronic, and violent offending, often through mechanisms like stress dysregulation, disrupted attachment, and association with deviant peers. How do ACEs increase offending risk? Mechanisms include dysregulation of stress systems, disrupted attachment and trust, modeling of aggression as normal, school disruption, substance misuse, and association with deviant peers. For example, a child exposed to domestic violence may learn aggression as a conflict strategy, struggle at school, and develop stable antisocial patterns. Still, not everyone with ACEs offends. Protective factors matter. Trauma, especially when early, severe, chronic, and paired with unstable caregiving, is strongly linked to later behavioral outcomes. However, trauma increases risk but does not determine outcomes. Many people with trauma histories do not offend, showing that supportive adults, stable schooling, and community resources can act as protective factors. Environmental and family factors play a crucial role in offending risk. Poverty increases stress and limits legitimate opportunities, while community violence can normalize aggression. Family dynamics, such as parental criminality or lack of supervision, also increase risk. Childhood maltreatment modestly increases the risk of later violence, and even a modest increase can have a large societal impact when exposure is common. Holistic approach recognizes that biological predispositions and psychosocial experiences are interconnected. For example, a child with neuropsychological vulnerabilities may be especially affected by a chaotic environment, while supportive parenting can buffer biological risk. Trauma can influence brain development, which in turn affects behavior. This integrated perspective is captured in the biopsychosocial model. General Personality and Cognitive Social Learning Theory of Criminal Conduct, GPCSL, integrates personality factors and cognitive social learning principles. It suggests that criminal conduct is shaped by learned patterns of thinking and behavior interacting with situational rewards and costs. There are multiple routes into crime, but learned behavior and reinforcement play central roles. GPCSL identifies 8 major predictors of criminal conduct and reoffending, known as the Central 8. These are dynamic factors, criminogenic needs, that can be changed through intervention. They include criminal history, procriminal attitudes, procriminal associates, antisocial personality pattern, family marital issues, school work problems, substance abuse, and lack of prosocial leisure activities. Criminal history refers to early involvement in crime, many prior offenses, and breaches while on release. While history itself can't be changed, interventions can focus on rehearsing non-criminal responses in high-risk situations and building self-efficacy for prosocial choices. For example, someone with a history of burglaries can practice alternative coping strategies for financial stress. Criminal attitudes are beliefs and rationalizations that support crime, such as hostility toward the law or minimizing harm to victims. Interventions target these attitudes through cognitive behavioral work, helping individuals develop prosocial beliefs and challenge justifications for crime. For example, replacing "they deserve it" with understanding victim impact. High association with antisocial peers and limited contact with prosocial peers increases offending risk. Interventions aim to reduce contact with procriminal networks and build prosocial social support. For example, helping someone restructure their peer group and access employment or education settings. This pattern involves impulsivity, sensation-seeking, aggression, low empathy, and disregard for others. Interventions focus on self-management, anger regulation, empathy development, and problem-solving skills. For example, learning to identify escalation cues and apply de-escalation strategies. Poor family relationships, weak supervision, high conflict, and family norms supportive of crime all increase risk. Interventions aim to reduce conflict, strengthen positive relationships, and improve monitoring. Family-based programs can set consistent rules and improve communication. Low performance, low satisfaction, and poor relationships in school or work contexts are risk factors. Interventions focus on improving attendance, skill development, and engagement. Vocational training and placement support can help improve employment stability and satisfaction. Problems with alcohol and drugs, especially current use, elevate the risk of reoffending. Interventions aim to reduce use, change peer and environmental supports, and develop alternative coping strategies. Integrated treatment can address triggers, relapse prevention, and social support restructuring. Low engagement in prosocial leisure activities increases risk. Interventions encourage involvement in satisfying, structured activities like sports or clubs. Regular participation reduces idle time, builds community ties, and improves well-being, helping to prevent reoffending. Behavior is shaped by perceived and actual consequences, rewards and costs. Rewards increase the probability of behavior, while costs decrease it. These can occur before or after the behavior. For example, an unlocked car signals low cost and high reward, increasing the temptation for theft. Individuals differ in what they value, what they fear, and how they respond to social reinforcement. There are different types of rewards and costs. Additive rewards add something pleasant after behavior, like money gained from theft. Subtractive rewards remove something unpleasant, like theft reducing financial pressure. Additive costs add something unpleasant, like legal sanctions, while subtractive costs remove something pleasant, like losing a job. Anticipated consequences also shape decision-making. Modeling is learning behavior by observing others, especially those who are admired or relatable. For example, a young person may model older peers who gain status through offending, increasing the likelihood of copying that behavior. Costs and rewards are not universal. What one person values or fears may differ from another, influencing their choices. Risk Need Responsivity R&R model is an evidence-based framework for offender assessment and treatment planning. The risk principle matches the intensity of services to the risk of reoffending. The need principle targets criminogenic needs, especially the central 8. The responsivity principle tailors interventions to the individual's learning style, motivation, abilities, and strengths. Applying the R&R model means matching intervention intensity to risk level and targeting dynamic needs. For example, a high-risk individual with precriminal peers and substance misuse might receive intensive CBT-based programs, while a lower-risk person with stable employment but anger issues might get focused anger management. This approach maximizes engagement and effectiveness by tailoring to individual needs. GPCSL's strengths include integrating multiple pathways, personality, learning, and environment, and identifying dynamic targets for intervention. It's supported by evidence that the central 8 predict recidivism. However, it may underweight macro-structural drivers like poverty, risk, responsibilizing individuals, and faces challenges in measuring attitudes and associates. Culturally sensitive application is also needed. GPCSL translates clearly into the R&R framework, guiding what to target, how intensely, and how to tailor interventions. It supports practical intervention mapping, such as CBT for precriminal attitudes, social network restructuring, substance treatment, and education or employment support. The focus is on dynamic change, reducing risk by changing factors that maintain offending, not excusing responsibility. Truly understand offending, we need to consider multiple levels of analysis: societal structures and strain, neighborhood opportunity and deprivation, peer learning and socialization, and individual traits and development. Biological and genetic factors provide insight into mechanisms but don't deterministically cause crime. Life experiences, especially ACEs, poverty, and family instability, increase risk through stress and learning. GPCSL and the R&R model offer structured, evidence-based approaches for assessment and intervention, making them highly influential in forensic psychology.